What I would like to suggest is that Valle's poem is conscious of and perhaps satirizes certain commonplace denigrating beliefs about the New World. Among them, that the lady's venereal disease, her ill-fated destiny, is directly tied to her New World subjectivity. In the stanza which spoke of the quicksilver of Huancavelica, we also read that the lady, in our quote, this is quote 5, tiene un mal francés, tan hijo de estas provincias que nacido en una ciudad que llaman de picardía. Has a French disease. You know, syphilis was called the Italian disease, the French disease, the Spanish disease, and all kinds of it has a French disease, a disease offspring of these provinces, born in the city they called Picardia, or mischief. Picardie in France. But he's talking of Lima, a disease which was born in Lima. These verses allude to a well-known debate concerning the origin of syphilis. Was it brought to the New World by Europeans, or was it transported to the Old World by Columbus's sailors? Curiously, it is the same official royal historian Fernández de Oviedo, already cited, who was one of the first to locate the origin of the diseases in the American continent. By the second half of the 17th century, when Valle Caviedes writes his poem, the idea that in America there was a predisposition towards the pox had become commonplace knowledge. In 1612, for example, the Dominican Juan de la Puente repeated a scientific belief which had much circulation, a belief which, it should be noted, reminds us of the lady's unlucky star. Juan de la Puente informs us that Americans' constellations induce inconstancy, lasciviousness, and lies, vices typical of the native population, and that through the influence of local astral constellations turn into characteristics that befall the Spaniards who are born and reside in America. Valles' poem therefore implicitly recalls this often cited belief of astral influence, the already mentioned American constellations, on the fate of the Spaniards in the New World. We could perhaps say that the poem connotes that the lady's star, her ill fortune of falling sick with a pox, stems in part to her contact with American soil, a place in which it was believed the pox had had its beginnings. I should now bring together some of the conjectures presented so far about this poem. We have seen that Valle Caviedes imagined his satire as a form of medical practice. And I have also suggested, in order to warn against the so-called plague of the pox, he makes use of this disgusting description of the female's infected body. At the same time, however, such conventional grotesque descriptions of the female, as found in a myriad of Baroque authors such as Quevedo himself, are contextualized satirically within an ideology that informed the European imaginary of the times. That is, he inscribes in his poem familiar denigrations of the New World and its inhabitants. Significantly, the poem gives us a reference to the birth of syphilis in a paradoxical fashion, speaking as the French disease, but at the same time saying it was the offspring of the local provinces and born in the city of Picardia, roguishness, a known epithet for Lima. This paradoxical or contradictory reference to the pox is a commentary, I believe, on the conflicted nature of American subjectivity, torn between the old and the new. The pox is called the French disease, but it is born in Lima. Beliefs concerning the New World as a place given to licentious sexual activity and economic promiscuity recontextualize a long-standing misogynist tradition within the creation of a nascent image of American nature as origin of all of its later misfortunes. One would only have to recall cultural inventions of women, later women, such as La Malinche or Doña Bárbara, who exemplify an American negativity that had served until recent times to explain many of Latin Americans' social problems. Valle Caviedes partakes of a misogynist tradition, but his scrutiny of viceregal society gives us a different perspective through which the reader can uncover the anxieties of a Spanish society who, towards the end of the 17th century, was beginning to come to terms with its complex and problematic relationship with the so-called mother country. When one reads Valle's poetry, not only as witty aesthetic imitation of his Spanish counterparts, but as cultural discourse, the suffering and infected ladies of his poetry allow us to visualize some of the many fissures and social contradictions that were taking place in New World viceroyalties. The ladies undoubtedly perpetuate the lamentable misogynist tradition of Spanish literature, but at the same time they offer the poet the opportunity to recognize or perhaps question some of the early inventions that informed the European view of the New World toward the end of the 17th century, something which at the same time allows us to recognize or underscore the historical and not the natural condition of the vituperation of women in Western culture. I should now add that I'm not claiming that Valle Cavides' satire offers us a subversive stance against misogyny of Spanish rule. No. The poet is a Spaniard who lived in the New World, and in the role of a local satirical anatomist, looks careful and reflects on some of the early differences and contradictions of Lima's social and political body. I hope I'm not running out of time. Because I have 275 pages. I will now turn to another set of poems, which have also been seen merely as witty imitation of the stock of Western satire. Again, however, if we read them in the context, this is easier. In the content of Viceregal ideology, one is able to detect further meditations on New World realities and its colonial subjects. In one of a set of poems that, I might just skip this, and go to the third part, because it's going to be too long. Right, good. So, because there are three poems, I'm going to skip the second one and go to the third one. Much like the case of his contemporaries on the other side of the ocean, Valle Cavides' Baroque worldview shows a preoccupation with... José Antonio Maravall is a great historian who wrote about the Baroque in Spain. The book is called El Barroco, the Baroque. He speaks of the Baroque, and he speaks of a principle called modificación, or mudanza, mutability, instability, changing. In the case of the Viceregal context, such sensitivities to change must have been intensified by the formation of what could be thought of a new society, and by the initial rise of proto-national feelings, which Bernard Lavalle refers to as proto-criollismo. As José Durán reminds us, unlike Spanish Peninsular society, social mobility, commerce among the nobility was not looked down upon, but rather accepted, much unlike Spain. The New World resident was aware that not only his surrounding, but his or her subjectivity differed in some fashion from those of the homeland. It is therefore no surprise that myths of transformation are part of Valle Cavides' literary repertoire. A favorite one seems to be the Narcissus myth. We know the Narcissus myth. He retells it in a mock mythological poem, of which there are many examples in European literatures, but very few in Spanish America. Diverging from the direct Ovidian tradition to which it belongs, and in the vein of Spanish, I don't know if you've read Ovid's myth of Narcissus, but the French and the Spanish, they read Ovid, but there were moralized versions or moralized translations of Ovid, because Ovid could be pretty risque. Diverging from the direct Ovidian tradition to which it belongs, and in the vein of Spanish translations and their moral commentaries, such as the one by Juan Pérez de Moya of 1585, Valle Cavides' Narcissus, upon looking at his reflection in the water, does not see himself. Rather, he sees a nymph. And it is with her that he falls madly in love. The poem's narrator, in a burlesque spirit, tells us that Narcissus, in love with that image which is and is not his, repeatedly attempts to return to it, but when he looks in the water's mirror, he sees only a distorted replica of himself. In other words, he sees what he is and what he is not. For example, here's a quote. I'll just give you the paraphrase. In ponds and wells, he looked for a watered-down nymph, but pleasure remained in the well, where she was never to be found. To catch her, he would plunge his hands into the watery crystal, but he could never fish her out.